Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's State and Federal Program Directors Meeting. We welcome you today and appreciate you joining us this morning. As we know, this is a very busy week, so we're glad you're here today. I'm Adrienne Balcazar, and I would like to introduce the LCAP-State and Federal Programs Unit. Joining us today is Helen Choi,
Good morning.
Augustine Garcia,
Good morning, everyone.
Rachel Garcia,
Good morning, everyone.
Anita Lomalee,
Hello.
and Tina Park. And joining us from our staff is April Grease,
Good morning.
Susanna Mendoza.
Good morning.
To access today's presentation, we ask you to click on the link in the chat. The presentation can also be accessed through the link on the slide. Once you click on the icon as shown here, you can download the presentation and any other related resources. We are recording today's meeting and we will be posting the link as well for this very soon. Today, we will be covering the consolidated application, the winter release. We will also take a look at all the most of the required postings. It's not an exhaustive list. We'll take a look at federal program monitoring, the student support and professional development block grant, and then the LCAP timeline, and we'll discuss the 25-26 additional learning recovery education block grant options. We ask you to please place your questions in the chat box and we will answer any questions that we can. We will be following up with the written responses in a Q&A that will be emailed to everyone who is registered, and then it will also be available on our campus page. Before we get started, hot off the press, CDE just released the data file for the schools that were eligible to exit the CSI and the ATSI, and also the schools that were eligible for TSI as required by ESSA based on the 2025 California dashboard. So if you didn't know, you know today. Now you can take a look. We have all the various links here for the different databases as well as the main CDE webpage, and then specific departments if you have specific questions. So again, we wanted to let you know that the new eligibility list and the exit list have now been posted. And now I will turn it over to Augustine, who will share about the consolidated application winter release.
Thank you, Adrienne. Good morning and happy Thursday, everyone. So this morning, I'll be going over some reminders on the winter release of the Consolidated Application and Reporting System, lovingly referred to as the CONAP or CARS. So we'll begin with the CARS winter release timeline, as well as the list of forms that we completed this winter. As you can see, we'll be closing out our fiscal year 2023-24. We'll be reporting 18-month expenditures and carryover for fiscal year 24-25. And of course, we have our current fiscal year 25-26 allocations and reservations. The links on the slide are to the CDE websites, where you'll find information and instructions for the winter release, as well as who we can contact for the specific federal programs. But because it's the biggest of the federal programs, we're going to use Title I Part A as the primary focus of this CONAP winter release presentation. The reports to be completed for Title I Part A during this winter release are identified on this slide, and let's take a closer look at all of them in the upcoming slides. All right, let's start with Title I Part A closeout report for fiscal year 2023-24. For LEAs that reported a Title I Part A carryover last winter, the closeout report must show expenditures tied to that carryover amount. This confirms that all fiscal year 2023-24 Title I Part A funds, including any required reservations, were fully expended by September 30th, 2025. After the 2025-26 CARS winter release closes, the California Department of Education will invoice any LEA that reports remaining unspent fiscal year 23-24 Title I Part A funds on that closeout report. So here's an example of an LEA with unspent 23-24 carryover funds. So during last year's winter CONAP release, this district right here reported $39,896 in Title I Part A carryover as of September 30th, 2024. However, the district's final expenditure report shows that only $35,973 of these funds were obligated and liquidated, resulting in $3,923 remaining unspent. So this district should expect an invoice from the CDE for that unspent amount. If you're new to the role, you might be thinking, wow, 23-24 feels like a long time ago. Are we really still reporting on those Title I Part A funds? Well, the answer is yes, and here's why. So an LEA is allowed to access Title I Part A funds for a full 15-month period before carryover limitations apply. September 30th marks the end of the federal fiscal year, and federal rules require that funds be obligated by that date. We'll talk a little bit more about obligation later in this presentation. It's also important to distinguish between the federal fiscal year and the state fiscal year. That timing difference results in an extended 27-month availability period rather than this 24 months. So as previously mentioned, there's a federal period of availability with a 27-month window for Title I Part A funds. The minimum percentage of funds that an LEA must expend or obligate each year by September 30th is 85%. And the amount of funds that may carry over for 1 year is 15%. So let's take a look at the example on the screen. In this example, if the LEA's total 24-25 allocation was $1 million, then the minimum amount to expend or obligate by September 30th, 2025 was $850,000, or 85% of those $1 million. The amount that this LEA may carry over to expend and obligate for an additional 12 months will be $150,000, or 15% of that same $1 million. Just please note that that 15% carryover limitation does not apply if the LEA allocation, including funds transferred in from other federal education programs, is less than $500,000 for that year. So an LEA may carry over a portion of its Title I Part A allocation from one fiscal year to the next. That carryover amount may not exceed 15% of the LEA's total Title I Part A allocation for that fiscal year. It's important to note that the 15% limit applies only to the current year's allocation and does not include any funds carried over from the prior year. And CDE may approve a waiver of that 15% limitation, but no more than once every 3 years. LEAs that wish to request a waiver may do so through the Winter Con-App. The purpose of the 15% carryover limit is to ensure that funds allocated for a given year are primarily used to benefit students in that same year. So in short, that Title I carryover rule is about making sure that this year's funds are used on this year's students. Any unspent Title I Part A funds that are at or below the allowable 15% threshold remain available for obligation for an additional fiscal year. Consistent with ESSA Section 1127A, these unspent funds may include funds reserved for specific purposes that were not fully used, funds retained for LEA-wide student services, and funds allocated to one or more specific schools. All right, so now let's talk about the Title I Part A carryover waiver. So LEAs complete the Title I Part A LEA carryover data collection form in the Con-App during the winter release to report expenditures and obligations through September 30th. Once the expenditure and obligation amounts are entered into the form and the form is saved, the system calculates the carryover dollar amount and the percentage. If the LEA has a carryover greater than 15% and is eligible to apply for a waiver, the waiver request section will display in the Title I Part A LEA carryover form when the form is saved. So let's explore the eligibility timeline for a sample waiver of the carryover limitation. If, for instance, the LEA's waiver for the carryover was granted and approved during the 21-22 fiscal year, the next opportunity for the LEA to apply for such a waiver will be in the 24-25 fiscal year. This is because the State Board of Education has the authority to waive the carryover limitation once every 3 years. So since we know that funds have to be obligated by specific deadlines, let's take a look at when an obligation is made. This table shows when a state or subgrantee makes obligations for various kinds of property and services. The guidelines for these obligations are outlined in 34 CFR 76.707, and we've included a direct link to this regulation on this slide for your reference. Now, what you see in this chart is a breakdown of when a state or a subgrantee needs to make these obligations for various types of property and services. This information becomes increasingly vital as you approach the end of the obligation period. Please note that these obligations vary for different categories of expenses. So for example, if the obligation pertains to personal services provided by a contractor who's not an employee, the obligation is made on the date when the grantee makes a binding written commitment to obtain the services. On the other hand, if it's related to travel, the obligation is fulfilled when the travel actually occurs. These obligations count towards the amount you've spent in a given year, and this can help manage your carryover or prevent you from exceeding the timeline for fund expenditure. Following the obligation, you typically have a 90-day window to liquidate the funds. In simpler terms, to liquidate means to settle the bill. So when you have a binding agreement or a contract to pay for a service, the actual payment constitutes the liquidation. And this payment, of course, must occur within that 90-day period. And with Title I Part A, there are also some required reservations that need to be populated in the CONAP. LEAs are required to reserve specific amounts of funds for identified programs. They also have the discretion to reserve additional Title I Part A funds for other allowable activities. The required reservations are for parent and family engagement activities, students who are in homeless situations, and students who reside in local neglected and delinquent institutions. So parent and family engagement reservation. So an LEA with a Title I Part A allocation of more than $500,000 must reserve at least 1% of that year's allocation for parent and family engagement activities. The 1% parent and family engagement reservation is calculated based on the LEA's total Title I Part A allocation after subtracting the private school equitable services proportional share. That 1% must be split between the school level and the LEA level. At the school level, at least 90% of the PFE reservation must be distributed to schools for parent and family activities. At the LEA level, the LEA may use the remaining 10% for parent and family engagement activities at the LEA level or choose to distribute those funds back to the schools. LEAs must also reserve Title I Part A funds to support students experiencing homelessness as defined under the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. These funds must be used to provide educationally related support services to children and youth living in shelters, temporary housing, or other unstable living situations. Services provided with Title I Part A funds must be comparable to those provided to students in non-Title I Part A schools. And LEAs that receive Title I Part A funds must reserve funds as needed to ensure that all children have access to a high-quality education and help close that achievement gap in meeting the state's challenging academic standards. As a part of this requirement, LEAs must reserve funds to provide services that are comparable to those provided in Title I Part A schools for children in local institutions for neglected children, and when appropriate, children in local institutions for delinquent children, as well as neglected children in community day programs. And finally, expenditures for educational services and other benefits for eligible private school students must be proportional to the share of funds allocated to participating attendance areas based on the number of low-income children who attend private schools. The proportional share must be calculated using the LEA's total Title I Part A allocation before any allowable LEA level expenditures are taken. Funds reserved for educational services and other benefits for eligible private school students must be obligated within the applicable fiscal year. So to wrap up this section, let's review a few key takeaways. The CARS winter release deadlines matter, so ensure your timely submission to avoid any delays. Title I Part A closeout reporting is required when prior year carryover was reported. So again, unspent fiscal year 2023-24 funds will be invoiced by the CD after this winter release closes. And remember that LEAs may apply for a carryover waiver once every 3 years if carryover exceeds 15%, and of course, if eligibility conditions are met. And finally, don't forget about those required reservations under ESSA. They include, of course, the parent and family engagement, homeless children and youth, and children in neglected and delinquent institutions. Happy holidays, everyone. I'll turn it over to Rachel.
Thank you, Augustine, and hello, everyone. So in this section, we just have a few reminders regarding some required web postings. Next slide. So as you know, there are a number of plans, policies, and other documents that LEAs are required to post on their website based on state and federal laws. And there are also some items that are required to be posted on school websites. And we know that this can sometimes be challenging because there's not really one central place where you can go to find out everything that's required to be posted on your LEA or school websites. So to support you with this, we created a web postings resources document that we periodically review and update. And on this slide, you can see screenshots of the first 2 pages of the resource. And you can access the full document with today's materials on our Canvas page. An important thing to keep in mind is that this document highlights several required web postings, but it is by no means inclusive of all state and federal posting requirements. Now, the resource chart, it includes a brief description of the posting requirement and a link to the specific education code or other reference where you can find additional information. Several of the posting requirements are monitored through the FPM process. So for those items, we've also included the applicable FPM instrument item numbers for your reference. We also have bolded key language from statute that specifies how the information needs to be posted on the LEA's website, because in some cases it's very specific. For example, some items indicate it must be prominently posted on the LEA's homepage, and some items indicate it must be posted in a prominent and conspicuous location on the website and easily accessible to parents, guardians, and pupils. So it's really important to refer to the specific language in statute when determining where or how to post the specific items on your website. And in the next few slides, we're going to highlight some of the items from this resource that are required to be posted on the LEA's website. So as you know, LEAs are required to post the approved LCAP on its website. The language in statute specifies that it must be prominently posted on the homepage of the internet website, and this applies to school districts, charter schools, and county offices. For school district, it's the county-approved LCAP that must be posted. It's also important to note that all previously approved LCAPs must be posted on your LEA website per statute. So this means that you should have all of your previously approved LCAPs posted on your website and not just your current LCAP. Additionally, school districts are required to prominently post on their website all LCAPs submitted by charter schools that were authorized by the school district. Now, the same education code that requires the web posting of the approved LCAP, it also requires the web posting of the approved LCAP federal addendum, and this includes any revisions to the federal addendum. So that means that your original CDE approved LCAP federal addendum and any subsequent revisions should be posted on the same web page as your LCAP. Education code also requires county offices to post all LCAPs submitted by school districts and charter schools. So here on this slide, we've included the link to our LACO webpage where the plans are posted. And once you arrive at laco.edu, you'll need to click on LCAPs, which is at the top of the webpage. This will take you to the Los Angeles County LCAPs webpage, where you will see 3 buttons indicating the LCAP cycle years. And here you will find the county-approved LCAPs for all school districts in LA County, as well as LCAPs submitted by charter schools in LA County. So in the event that your LEA does not have a previously approved LCAP posted and you're not sure where to find that specific year, you can go to our LACO webpage to download the plan for that specific year. There are also a number of items required to be posted on the LEA's website related to bullying and harassment prevention per Education Code 234.6b. And so there are several items that are included in this education code. So this includes the LEA's policy on suicide prevention in grades 7 to 12 and in kindergarten and grades 1 through 6. Also, a link to the definition of discrimination and harassment based on sex, the Title IX information required by Section 221.61, also a link to the Title IX information included on the CDE's website, the LEA's written policy on sexual harassment as it pertains to students, also the LEA's policy on preventing and responding to hate violence if one exists, and the LEA's anti-discrimination, anti-harassment, anti-intimidation, and anti-bullying policies. And so here on this slide, continuing with the items related to bullying and harassment prevention, LEAs must also post the LEA's anti-cyberbullying procedures, a section on social media bullying that includes all of the references indicated related to possible social media bullying forums, a link to statewide resources compiled by the CDE, and also any additional information that the LEA deems important for preventing bullying and harassment. And then something new for the 2025-26 academic year that was added to this education code and became effective January 1st, 2025, is that LEAs must ensure that the resources related to neurodiversity developed by the UC and CSU Collaborative for Neurodiversity and Learning are readily accessible on the LEA's website. And so again, it's important to note that statute specifies that these items must be readily accessible in a prominent location on the LEA's website in a manner that is easily accessible to parents or guardians and pupils. So again, that statute language is very specific and important. For the Proposition 28 Arts and Music in Schools funds, LEAs are required to post the board or body approved annual report on their website. And this report details the types of arts education programs funded, the number of full-time equivalent teachers, classified personnel, and teaching aides, also the number of students served, and the number of school sites providing arts education programs with Proposition 28 funds. Another required posting is related to restraint and seclusion data. So LEAs are required to submit counts on the use of behavior restraints and seclusion to the CDE on an annual basis through the CalPADS end-of-year data submissions. And so this same restraint and seclusion data that's submitted to the CDE, it must also be posted annually on the LEA's website. Now here we wanted to highlight two fairly new posting requirements. And the first one has to do with racial discrimination, harassment, or hazing at high school sporting events or games. So LEAs that participate in the California Interscholastic Federation, or CIF, are required to post on their website the standardized incident tracking form developed by the CDE, along with information on how to submit that completed form to the LEA. Another posting requirement, which was effective as of January 1st, 2025, is related to the notification requirement to parents and guardians about dangers associated with synthetic drugs. LEAs are required to annually inform parents and guardians of each student enrolled at the beginning of the first semester or quarter of the regular term about the dangers associated with synthetic drug use, such as fentanyl, including the possibility that these drugs can be found in counterfeit pills and the risk of social media platforms being used to market and sell synthetic drugs. And LEAs are required to also post this information on the LEA website, as well as each school's website if the school maintains a website. As previously mentioned, several of the required web postings are monitored through the FPM process. And so here we just wanted to highlight one example, and this is from the Education Equity Instrument. So for item 3 in this instrument, one of the evidence requests includes the web posting of the pupil suicide prevention policy for grades 7 through 12 and K6. So per education code, these policies must be readily accessible in a prominent location on the LEA's website in a manner that's easily accessible to parents, guardians, and students. So for this item, an LEA would need to provide a screenshot of each web page where the information is posted, including the full click path from the home page to the landing page. And so the FPM reviewer would also be looking to see that this item is readily accessible and in a prominent location. And so again, the web postings resource, it highlights some required web postings, and it is not an exhaustive list. And then again, remember to refer to the specific law for the items required to be posted to ensure that you're meeting the requirement. And I will now turn it over to Adrian.
Thank you, Rachel. So now we're going to focus on FPM. In October, we shared this slide to show how the implementation of your federal programs is dependent on your timeline. So now we are in December, and you probably are in the midst of implementing your federal programs. But as the year progresses, you will continue monitoring the implementation of your actions and activities. But towards the end of the school year, you will need to evaluate the effectiveness of your actions. Now is a good time to begin reflecting on the compliance of your federal programs. Are you implementing compliant programs? Do your procedures include an organized framework that everyone is knowledgeable about? And have you done the training that you needed to do in order to implement this framework? Do you have strong systems in place? And is everyone following your policies and practices? Another question is, how would you know that everyone is following the policies and practices? And are you collecting the evidence requested for each federal program? Currently, the 25-26 FPM program instruments are not posted on the CDE's FPM webpage. The only way to download the 25-26 program instruments is through the CDE's box. In the box, you will find folders for each program being reviewed that include training materials, samples, and other resources. In the box, you will find the program instruments. So for compensatory education, you will also find a companion document, which is called the CE 2526 Program Instrument Checklist. This checklist is not intended to be used in place of the CE program instrument because it may not reflect every requirement contained in the instrument, but it is intended to be used as a tool alongside the CE program instrument to assist you as you compile and review the evidence in preparation for an FPM review. For English learner programs, there is the 25-26 EL Instrument Evidence Request Guide. This request guide is organized a little bit differently than the CE program instrument checklist. It lists the EL instrument items and the evidence requests, but it also identifies if the evidence is needed by the site or the LEA level. And then it also identifies if it applies to charter schools. For the school support and improvement, there is the SSI 25-26 program instrument checklist. And this document, just like the CE checklist, is not intended to be used in place of the SSI program instrument, again, because it may not reflect every requirement contained within the instrument. So you must always follow the program instrument. But again, this checklist is intended to be used as a tool alongside the SSI program instrument. It is meant to assist in compiling and reviewing evidence. Next, we want to share our LCAP-SFP units publication, The 10 Steps to FPM Success. This binder has been revised, and we have added some additional resources for you. You can find it on our publication tab as shown here with the arrow. The link at the bottom of the slide will also take you to our publication webpage. What we have added to this binder is a sample of how do you operationalize the collection of your site level evidence. We have organized the collection of the site level evidence into 3 times throughout the school year: fall, winter, spring, and the items requested are aligned to a typical implementation timeline. So again, it's just additional resources. Sometimes those that purchase Title I crate or any other type of organizational platform have to set it up. So this could aid in terms of your setup when you want to collect your evidence from your sites. We have also created a timeline of due dates for the EL program site level collection of evidence. There are many useful tools and resources in our FPM binder publication. And so as we conclude this FPM update, we ask you again, have you reflected on your system? Do you have strong systems in place to collect the evidence requested for each federal program? And now I'll turn it over to Anita.
Great. Well, thank you, Adrienne. And as we proceed with this section of the presentation, please note that the Student Support and Professional Development Discretionary Block Grant will be affectionately referred to as SPUDBUG in the forthcoming slides. Section 81 of Assembly Bill 121 established the Student Support and Professional Development Discretionary Block Grant. AB 121 and the 2025 Budget Act appropriated $1.7 billion in Proposition 98 General Fund. Funding is available for allocation to school districts, charter schools, county offices of education, and state special schools with an average daily attendance for transitional kindergarten, and grades 1 to 12 inclusive. Next, we have information on the SPUDBUG funding formula. Funds are allocated on an equal amount per unit of average daily attendance for TK, Kinder, and grades 1 to 12 inclusive, as reported on the second principal apportionment for the 24-25 fiscal year. For select LEAs impacted by the fires in January of 2025, the 2024 first principal apportionment was used to determine allocation. For state special schools, such as the California School for the Blind or School for the Deaf, the ADA is deemed to be 97% of the enrollment as reported in CalPADS for the 24-25 Fall 1 submission. So based on the principal apportionments, the per unit funding rate calculates to be $313.08. The link on this slide will take you to the CDE spreadsheet that lists all LEAs receiving funds and their respective allocations and apportionments. Now, the first apportionment of the SPUDBUG funding was already released to LEAs in late October. This apportionment was 75% of the total allocation. In February of 2026, LEAs should expect to receive the remaining 25% of the total allocation. And although LEAs will be in receipt of the totality of these one-time funds by February, these discretionary funds are available for expenditure through June 30th of 2029. LEAs are to use the SACS resource code 6019 for the Student Support and Professional Development Discretionary Block Grant. Now, as for allowable uses, please note that the SPUDBUG one-time funds may be used for discretionary purposes, but nevertheless, LEAs are encouraged but not required to use the funds for the following purposes. Provide standards-aligned professional development for teachers on any of the following: the English Language Arts, the ELD, English Language Development Framework, the Literacy Roadmap, including strategies to support literacy for English learners, and the Mathematics Framework for California Public Schools. Also, to develop and expand teacher recruitment and retention strategies, expand career pathways and dual enrollment efforts consistent with the Master Plan for Career Education, and also to address rising costs in the LEA. There are SPUDBUG reporting requirements. LEAs, school district, charter schools, and COEs will be required to submit annual expenditure reports that will be due no later than September 30th of each fiscal year, beginning in 2026 and ending in 2029. This means that an expenditure report will be expected no later than September 30th of 2026, September 30th of 2027, September 30th of 2028, and September 30th, 2029. LEAs that receive the SPUDBUG one-time funds are required to report final expenditures to the CDE by September 30th of 2029. If a charter school ceases to operate before June 30th of 2029, its final expenditure report shall be due to the CDE within 60 days of the effective date of closure, and the CDE shall collect any unexpended funds allocated to the charter school this fiscal year. So please note that for LEAs that use all of the one-time funds within this first fiscal year, the reporting structure will still require LEAs to submit annual reports, even if all the funds are fully spent. This reporting structure is just like the one in place for the Educator Effectiveness Grant. So the legislation required the CDE to provide the reporting template by January 1st, 2026, and the reporting template will be posted on the SpudBug webpage, and it will be posted by the required date per CDE. Another reminder, the first annual report will be due September 30th of 2026, and the final report will be due September 30th, 2029. The CDE is requiring annual reporting as a response to requests for information to justify future funding opportunities that may come our way and to confirm funding is being appropriately used and tracked at the local level. So right about now, you may be wondering about the planning requirements. Well, Section 81 of AB 121 does not require LEAs to have a board-approved plan for their SpudBug expenditures. But here are some guidelines to keep in mind. CDE recommends following your LEA's policy regarding board approval requirements for this program. Ensure that key members are included, such as your superintendent, of course. And CDE is not approving nor denying individual LEA requests for allowable expenditures. LEAs are encouraged to maintain documentation showing how the expenditures align with the intent of the grant. And keep in mind that SpudBug funds are discretionary funds, but also they are only one-time funds. These will not be ongoing. And these next two slides are handy as they provide upcoming information and the required reporting tasks through June of 2029. And the next slide. And lastly, should you have any questions or need to dig a little deeper, here are some useful web pages. You can visit the web pages for the SpudBug program, funding, and frequently asked questions by clicking on these links provided on this slide. On the frequently asked questions webpage, in particular, there are many good questions that CDE has already answered for you. If you have additional questions, you can email the School Fiscal Services Division or the Professional Learning Support Division at the email addresses listed here. And so I hope you enjoyed the information and the SpudBug mascot that appeared throughout this section. Up next is Helen.
Thank you, Anita. Yes, I love the mascot. Great job. So in this section, we'll take a look at the LCAP timeline and highlight a few key points for consideration. And we'll also spend some time discussing the 25-26 additional LREBG apportionment options, including how LEAs may approach planning and implementation moving forward. Okay. So as we move through the winter season and begin preparing for the spring semester, this is an important moment for our LEAs to pause, reflect, and plan intentionally. We encourage you to consider the following guiding questions as part of your LCAP development and annual update work. We ask that you consider how your goal analysis aligns with the annual measurable outcomes using all available data. Reflect on how your LEA is gathering meaningful input from educational partners and how that input, along with the advisory committee feedback, informs changes moving forward and guides your annual update discussions. Also consider how the governing board or the body is informed and involved in the goal analysis, annual outcomes, and LCFF expenditures, as well as how fiscal and program updates and consultation input are shared. And finally, think ahead to the implications of the 25-26 carryover for the 26-27 LCAP and how your LEA is planning for potential changes in the LCFF revenue due to the governor's budget, COLA, ADA, and enrollment trends. And included on this slide for your reference are the LCAP timeline and the summary of legal requirements, which are intended to support your planning and reflection as you move forward. In the next few slides, we are going to discuss the 25-26 Additional Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant Funding, otherwise known as LREBG. So as you can see, the 25-26 LREBG funds that were allocated at the start of the school year, it's important to note that these funds were not included in the original 25-26 LCAP when the plan was first developed. Because of this, LEAs will need to consider how best to incorporate them moving forward. The governor's budget allocated $378,650,000 in the new LREBG funding statewide for 25-26. These additional funds fall under the Ed Code Section 52064.4, which requires that any LEAs with unexpected LREBG funds to include one or more LREBG actions within the 25-26, 26-27, and or the 27-28 LCAPs. And with this increase, LEAs will need to review the LREBG expenditure options and determine how to allocate and justify these additional funds to support student needs, ensuring the alignment with the allowable uses of the LREBG funds. And remember, before LEAs can begin spending the LREBG funds, there's an important first step. LEAs must complete the required needs assessment before expending any LREBG funds in the LCAP, as outlined in Educational Code 52064D. If your LEA has already completed this needs assessment, there's no need to conduct a new one specifically for the additional LREBG funds. This ensures that all expenditures are grounded in identified student needs. The CDE has outlined several options for how LEAs may expend the additional LREBG funds. First, an LEA may choose not to include the funds in the 25-26 LCAP and instead include them in the 26-27 LCAP as part of their regular annual update process. Alternatively, an LEA may choose to include the 25-26 LREBG funds in the current year's LCAP, either through the mid-year update or the annual update process, provided that the educational partners are comfortable with this inclusion. If the LEA takes this approach, it must also consider whether this change constitutes a revision under the LCAP requirements, and we'll discuss that revision in just a little bit. And remember that the option to add funds mid-year is grounded in Educational Code 52062C, which states that the governing board of a school district may adopt revisions to an LCAP during the period the LCAP is in effect as long as it follows the same process required to adopt an LCAP. This means that if an LEA plans to revise its 25-26 plan mid-year, it must follow all statutory procedures for the LCAP adoption. And before we look at these procedures, let's discuss what actually constitutes a revision. So, what constitutes a revision? As noted here, it is incumbent upon each LEA to determine what constitutes a revision to the LCAP, as the term revision has not been formally defined in the relations to this requirement. When making this determination, an LEA should consider the significance of the proposed changes, the impact the changes will have on the plan, students, and the educational partners, the relationship the LEA has with its ed partners and the community. Ultimately, each LEA working with their governing board or their governing body is responsible for making a thoughtful, informed decision about whether a change qualifies as a revision. And if an LEA determines that including the additional LREBG funds constitutes a revision, the first step is to ensure that all applicable LREBG requirements are added to the 25-26 LCAP, including the plan summary, the action description, the total funds, goal analysis, and the budget overview for parents. The LEA must then follow the process outlined in Ed Code 52062 to adopt the revised LCAP, consulting required educational partners, presenting the plan to applicable committees such as your Parent Advisory Committee, the English Learner Parent Advisory Committees, or your Student Advisory Committee for review and comment, providing a public comment period, consulting with SELPA, holding public hearing, and conducting a separate board adoption. And finally, the revised plan must be submitted back to the County Office of Education for review and approval. If an LEA decides to include the additional LREBG funds in the 25-26 LCAP, but determines that doing so does not constitute a revision, it's still important to prioritize transparency. This means clearly sharing the additional funding and its proposed use with the educational partners, giving them opportunity to provide feedback, and communicating the same information to the local governing board or the governing body. The 25-26 LCAP with additional LREBG funds included must then be presented to the governing board as part of the mid-year update. Importantly, the mid-year report should not be the first time the educational partners hear about the change. Additionally, the LEA should include the additional LREBG funds in the estimated actual expenditures for each applicable LREBG action in the 25-26 annual update table when completing the 26-27 LCAP. And finally, document all the changes in the applicable goal analysis prompts when completing the 26-27 LCAP. So with all of this context in mind, the next few slides will walk us through several options designed to help your LEA understand how to apply the additional LREBG funding. These options will illustrate the key decision points and requirements available as your LEA moves forward. So on this slide, we have the LACO LREBG checklist, which we will go through to support your LEA making decisions regarding these funds. The document is also linked on this slide for your reference. And many of you here may have already seen this checklist during our district meetings as well that we held this month. And the checklist serves as a helpful guide to ensure that all steps are considered and documented. So let's start with this question. Will your LEA expend the additional 25-26 LREBG funding during the 25-26 school year? This is an important decision point as it will guide whether the funds are included in the current year's LCAP or held for next year's plan. So let's explore some implications of these options in the upcoming slides. So if the answer is no, your LEA is planning to expend the additional LREBG funds in 26-27, then we need to look at option 2. Yes, I'm starting from 2 and we're going to work backwards and we'll go over option 1 in just a little bit. For option 2, the additional LREBG funds must be reflected in several sections of the LCAP. The plan summary, the annual performance prompt, the action descriptions, including all the requirements that we discussed earlier, the goal analysis prompt 4, total expenditures table coded under other state funds. And remember, all requirements still apply, including completing the needs assessment and ensuring that the requirements of the LREBG funded actions are included in the appropriate LCAP sections. So on our checklist, that's the option 2. So here's the question again. Will your LEA expend the additional 25-26 LREBG funding during the 25-26 school year? If your LEA answered yes to these questions, there are several additional options to consider, and this is the option 1 on the checklist. And each option comes with specific criteria and requirements that must be addressed. Okay, and we're going to walk through each option in detail to help you understand the implications and requirements for including the funds in the 25-26 LCAP. So let's take a look at option 1B, where the LEA adds additional LREBG funds to a new 25-26 action. So you're adding a new action to this 25-26 LCAP that's in place right now. In this case, the change would be considered a revision, since the action was not considered by the educational partners or the LEA when the plan was first adopted. If this occurs, In addition to sharing the information at the mid-year reporting, the LEAs must ensure that all applicable LRBG requirements are included in the 25-26 LCAP, including the plan summary, the annual performance prompt, the action descriptions, the total funds, the goal analysis, the budget overview for parents. So for districts, this also includes submitting the revised 25-26 LCAP to the County Office of Education for review and approval. And this process requires full educational partner engagement, and each applicable sections of the 25-26 LCAP must be updated to reflect the additional funds. And remember, the LCAP must be readopted by the board and approved by the County Office of Education. So let me ask this question again. Will your LEA expend the additional 25-26 LRBG funding during 25-26? And here we're exploring now option 1A. If your LEA has answered yes to this question, then the additional funds will be added to existing 25-26 LRBG action and/or existing 25-26 non-LRBG actions. There are different implications depending on whether or not the change constitutes a revision. It's important to remember that it's incumbent upon each LEA to determine what constitutes a revision for the purposes of this requirement. So whether the LEA is adding to an existing LRBG action or existing non-LRBG action, if the LEA determines that including the additional funds does not constitute a revision, it's still important to communicate the additional funding and the proposed uses to the educational partners, giving them opportunity for feedback, and to share this information with your local governing board. The LEAs must present how the additional funds will be used to the governing board as part of the mid-year update. And again, additionally, the LEA should include the LRBG funds in the estimated actual expenditures for each of the applicable LRBG action in the 25-26 annual update table when you're completing the 26-27 LCAP. And remember, it's important to document these changes in the applicable goal analysis prompt when completing the 26-27 LCAP to maintain transparency and to meet the LCAP requirements. So now, if it plans to spend the funds and add the funding to existing 25-26 LRBG actions or to existing 25-26 non-LRBG actions and determines that the change does constitute a revision, additional steps are required. Even simply adding funds to existing action, whether LRBG or not, may qualify as a revision depending on the LEA's local context. So beyond sharing this information during the mid-year reporting, the LEA must ensure that all applicable LRBG requirements are included in the 25-26 LCAP. Again, plan summary, the action descriptions, the goal analysis, and the budget overview for parents. And it must follow the process outlined in the Ed Code to adopt the revised LCAP. For districts, this includes submitting the revised 25-26 LCAP to the County Office of Education for review and approval. And remember that this process requires full educational partner engagement, including presentations to the PAC, the EL-PAC, and/or the student advisory committees. And remember, if you are using the LACO's EL-CAP system, you need to let your LCAP contact at LACO know right away. So in closing, remember that each LEA should carefully consider its local context when determining how to incorporate the additional LRBG funds into the 25-26 LCAP. It's imperative that LEAs communicate the additional LRBG funds and the proposed uses to ed partners and provide a meaningful opportunity for feedback. And equally important, the LEAs must also share this information with the local governing board or body. And in addition to LACO's border body. And in addition to the LACO's checklist, we have also linked the CD's LREBG resource page for your reference and for further guidance. And this concludes this section. So here are some upcoming deadlines that we'd like to share. This slide highlights several key state and federal reporting deadlines coming up soon. So we'll walk you through them one by one. The first one is CalPADS Fall 1. The official submission window opens on October 1st. It opened on October 1st and closes on January 23rd. And the certification deadline is December 12th, which actually just passed. While the SELPA approval is strongly encouraged by that date, it becomes required for any amendment submitted during the amendment window, which also closes on January 23rd. Next is the Federal Cash Management Data Collection, or CMDC. Reporting window 3 opens on January 10th, and the data reporting for period 3 must be submitted by January 31st. And the key reminder here is that even if the cash balance is 0, a CMDC report still must be submitted in order for LEAs to receive an apportionment. And remember, just like what Augustine spoke about earlier, 25-26, the CONAP winter release. The submission window runs from December 1st through January 15th, which is also the initial certification deadline. And the amendment window and the review window opens on January 16th and closes on February 15th. And finally, the School Accountability Report Card, or the SARC, must be published and submitted to CDE by February 1st. And the LCAP Mid-Year Update Report, as we presented before, must be presented on or before February 28th as a non-consent item at a regularly scheduled meeting of the governing board or body. So before we wrap up, we want to wish everyone a happy and restful holiday season. And as we close out the year, we thank you for your continued partnership, collaboration, and commitment to supporting your students and your LEA. And in the spirit of the season, we're also happy to give you the gift of time by concluding our meeting a little bit earlier today. And so please don't forget to complete the evaluation. Your feedback is valuable and very important and helps us guide our future trainings. Please use the link in the chat to complete the survey. And we thank you so much. And we will see you next year. And happy holidays from all of us.